All right, we will away. Please be seated.
Before I invite Mr. Bakrash to begin, I just alert the parties in terms of time that after Mr. Bakrash has completed his rejoinder, then the OTP would have 10 minutes, and then we'd allow Mr. Jordash and Mr. Bakrash 2 minutes each for further rejoinder. Yes, Mr. Bakrash.
Hvala, časni su.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, this morning we heard the prosecution rebuttal of the defense arguments presented yesterday. And a conclusion that I have to draw is that the prosecution, with all due respect, continued in their rebuttal of our arguments in the same manner which characterizes their final trial brief and their final arguments presented the day before yesterday, namely on page 5 of today's transcript. The prosecutor says, while contesting the defense arguments vis-a-vis the ceremony in Kula, the prosecutor said, I apologize, it's on page 5, where the prosecution says that Simatovic agreed that Milosevic was a key member of the joint criminal enterprise.
Apsolutno nije tačna.
This fact is absolutely not true. Once again, what is said is extracted from the context and an attempt is made to represent it in a different light. I invite you to look at page 71 of yesterday's transcript, where my learned friend, Mr. Petrovic, said the following, that the first and only contact between Mr. Simatovic and Mr. Milosevic as the key member in the joint criminal enterprise is part of the charges. It's being charged. Just as in our final trial brief, we noted whenever members of the JC are mentioned, at least as asserted by the prosecution, we said alleged members in the joint criminal enterprise. I think that my colleague, Mr. Petrovic, noted that he was an allegedly key member in the JCE when he said this. Another point that I would like to note for the trial chamber is from page 9 of today's transcript, where the prosecutor comments on our arguments about the speech read out by Mr. Simatovic during the ceremony in Kula in 1997. The prosecutor said that our claim that Dragicevic was the one who had written the speech is incorrect, because Dragicevic testified before the court and denied that he had written the speech. Before I delve into our reply and our arguments, I wish to point out that in principle, it's not really important who wrote the speech. Whoever wrote it does not change its substance. It does not change the fact that all the claims and assertions made in the speech are exaggerated and incorrect and stated for the purpose of impressing President Milosevic. However, something that we do wish to note for the trial chamber is that Dragicevic testified here under oath. Indeed, so did witness MICT. Both of them testified under oath. Before this tribunal, in his testimony, Dragicevic admitted that he was in charge of all the aspects of organizing the ceremony. It was only the speech that he had nothing to do with. Witness MICT, who is disinterested, he has no interest in establishing who wrote the speech, also said under oath that he knew that Dragicevic had written it. In my view, and in view of our defense team, it is more logical that Dragicevic wanted to evade this fact because it was a subject of much discussion here, and it's a subject that might be considered sensitive. Further, in today's address, the prosecution did the same thing as on Monday. Once again, things are taken out of context. A single word or a single sentence is selected. When responding to our arguments in connection with the interview of Captain Dragan, the prosecutor showed one part of the interview where Captain Dragan says, "Simatovic told me that the boss wants to see me in Belgrade." So, Captain Dragan did not say, "Simatovic told me that my boss or our boss wanted to see me in Belgrade." He simply said, Simatovic, that is, simply said and conveyed the message, "The boss wants to see you in Belgrade." It is not contested that there is some evidence that Simatovic and others in the service called the chief of the service boss. I think there's no need for me to testify about the manner in which we express ourselves in the Serbian language. I believe, even though I'm aware that I lack sufficient knowledge, that even in the English language, the word boss does not mean and cannot be interpreted without reasonable doubt that the boss is also Captain Dragan's boss. Likewise, just as he said the boss, the meaning would have been the same if he had said, "Stanišic wants to see you." So you cannot consider this as proof of closeness, connection, or subordination of Captain Dragan to either Franko Simatovic or Jovica Stanišic. Further, on page 10 of today's transcript,
Kolega Stringer je rekao
my learned friend Mr. Stringer said,
veću
he rather showed to the trial chamber interview with Milan Milanovic Mrgud with the Novosti Daily, and said, he insinuated that in that interview Mrgud said that he did not want to go into details because Stanišic is being tried here in The Hague. Once again, we have the situation where the words of my learned friend return to him as a boomerang. And we'll see very soon another such example related. So, my question which anyone with a sense of elementary logic would ask is, why would, if Stanišic, but I see, Your Honor, that I may have made a mistake because we discussed the same witness yesterday. Perhaps we should move into private session and strike from the record what I said.
We're back in open session, Your Honor.
Dakle,
On page 12 of today's transcript, my learned friend, Mrs. Stringer, showed a slide saying that it was obvious that the Serbian DB controlled the situation in SBWS at the 11th Corps.
Karana.
And he quoted Mladen Karan to corroborate that. He was a defense witness for Simatovic. And let me read out to you what my learned friend selected and said.
On 30 October 1995, that the Serbia state security is charged now. Dakle, ovo je
This is transcript, page 12 of today's transcript.
sekund.
Please bear with me just for a second.
Dakle,
I'm grateful to my learned friend, Mrs. Stringer, because he really helped us to realize that by the 30th of October 1995, which is several days before the Dayton Accords, the state security of Serbia did not have any influence or impact on the 11th Corps and in SBWS. So obviously, the evidence to which Mrs. Stringer referred shows that until the 30th of October, the DB of Serbia had no responsibilities or influence in the 11th Corps. And this will bring us to witness Stoparic, also on page 12 of today's transcript, and page 13 as well. The witness said, that the order for sending the Scorpions to Trnovo or to Mount Reskavica came from Belgrade, and that Lončar only communicated the order for the sake of form. The prosecution is really keen on relying on witness Stoparic. as a witness whose testimony should be the key evidence for the responsibility of the accused in terms of the subject of his testimony. On page 13 of today's transcript, my learned friend Mr. Stringer also said that the defense insinuated that prosecutor Groom influenced witness Stoparic, but they did not use the opportunity to cross-examine him on that. We'll return to this fact, or rather, to paint a clear picture for the trial chamber. What was said during cross-examination. Witness Stoparic said this when he was cross-examined by Mr. Edwards. The defense did not go any further, and later on we'll make it clear to you why the defense did not wish to go any further in the cross-examination. So let us leave aside whether we cross-examined witness Stoparic in detail about these circumstances. Here is the situation. There are only two possible situations. Firstly, that Stoparic was influenced, that he accepted the influence to say this, and the other one is that Stoparic lied. That prosecutor Groom asked him to do this. So it's either correct and Stoparic succumbed to the influence of the prosecution and said what suited them, or else Stoparic lied, that prosecutor Groom instructed him in any way. For the defense, this is unimportant. The defense did not want to contest this with Mr. Groom. We were not interested in this subject. We proved, and we have proved today, that witness Stoparic is unreliable and not a credible witness. I leave it up to my learned friend Mr. Stringer to choose which of the two options is correct. If Stoparic lied that the prosecutor influenced him, how can we trust him about anything else when he's refuted by other evidence? If Stoparic told the truth, then Stoparic has a tendency to accept the suggestions of the prosecution and to testify whatever the prosecution wants, regardless of whether it's true or not. For the defense, it was not important to establish this situation. The situation is clear. Stoparic is not credible, he's an unreliable witness, and this is something that we have proved. Considering that the charges against the accused are very serious, the prosecution would really have to rely on serious witnesses and serious evidence.
I kao vrhunac
The culmination of this lack of seriousness and acceptance of nonsensical statements and evidence, on page 15 of today's transcript, in his rebuttal, the prosecution stated, or rather referred to witness Nedeljko Orlić, P3417, page 2. Witness Orlić testified
3 meseca ostao u kampu.
that he stayed for 3 months at the camp in Korenica, where there were two instructors for rocket launchers, Franchi and Ficha. Franchi, who graduated from a college of economics and who only had regular military training, just like any one of us. Franchi, for whom there is no single evidence in this case, which has been retried and which has lasted for 18 years now, demonstrating that he has any military knowledge or military skills, well, according to the prosecution's assertion, and this nonsensical statement of a witness which the prosecution accepts, seems to have been training members of formations in Krajina for several months for rocket launchers. He was a rocket launcher instructor. Well, even if it's something coming from the prosecution, it's really too much. We cannot trust anyone who says anything here in this trial. The prosecution needs to have the minimum of reserve towards what a witness says. They have to think first logically, does that make any sense at all? And then try to draw logical conclusions and try to find corroboration in some other piece of evidence. A nonsensical claim like this cannot be presented in our faces at the very end of the trial like this. And that's one of the reasons why I said that the prosecution simply continued doing what they did in their final trial brief and in the manner in which they presented their final arguments. So their manner continues, and it's consistently the same. Finally, Your Honors, I see I have 5 minutes left, and I'm not going to use more of everyone's time. I wanted to address you.
Navoda tužilaštva
Also about the prosecution claim that the arguments of Simatovic's defense, that Franko Simatovic saw Mladic only twice, referring to witness RFJ 174, is simply not correct. Or rather, it's correct that RFJ 174 insinuated that there was another meeting between Mladic and Simatovic, but the witness described the situation in such a way that it's implausible and impossible. It's something that cannot really be imagined. And there is evidence that Mladic was not in the area at the time. But let me not use more time. I refer you to paragraph 612 of the Simatovic defense's final trial brief. And Your Honors, by this I conclude. This would be all. Thank you very much for the time allotted.
Thank you, Mr. Bakrash. Yes, Mr. Stringer.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Mr. President and Your Honors. For my first item, in the brief time that I have, I'm going to provide Mr. Bakrach with a little bit of fuel to throw on the flame. We did indeed misinterpret yesterday's transcript and the remarks of Mr. Petrovic. We went back now and have gone and listened to what was said by my learned friend, Mr. Petrovic, and based on his words in his language and how it's appeared in the transcript, I misinterpreted that, and they've certainly set the record straight on their position on that. Of course, I'm referring to the issue whether they're accepting Milosevic was in the JCE. So apologize for that. And the record, I think, is clear now. The next item it relates to submissions by Mr. Stanisic's counsel, Mr. Jordash, earlier today at transcript page 21 and 22, and we're going to bring up a slide here. There was a reference to this statement of a person who was a member of the unit for a fairly short period of time after joining in 1992. Counsel pointed out that he had reported that he thought he was joining a Serb army, a real nationalist sort of, Serb army, and when he found out that the unit that he was joining was different than what he expected, then he left. And we just wanted to quickly take your honors to the last page of this exhibit, which is 1D61, and this is at page 20. And actually, if we could go to, I don't think we have it on the slide, but I'll just read. At the bottom of page 19, the witness says, "However, I must also say that on the second or third day of my stay here, I asked my squad commander and my platoon commander one single question. What will happen to us in case there is a 9th of March, that's in quotes, event?" And Your Honor, we would submit that the 9th of March events here refers to the protests against Milosevic that occurred in March of 1992. The chamber heard evidence about that from at least one defense witness, Mr. Mile Bosnic. And this witness continues in 1D61 to say that, I'll just read, "Today, a month and a half after my question, we are facing a situation where, after being lined up nicely, we were asked, or rather a platoon commander asked, 'Are you ready to carry out an order at any time and any place?' And the report here says, 'I replied, if it involves the demonstrations in Belgrade, then I am not ready.' And then he goes on to say, 'Then they lined us up nicely, those of us who were ready on one side and those who were not on the other. Obviously, I stood in the stigmatized line and thought to myself, oh, how nice, another Serbian division.' This is all I have to say. This is all I have to state regarding my arrival, stay, and departure from the Special Purposes Unit of the Serbian MUP. And again, we refer your honors to the testimony of Mile Bosnic, who describes the decision made over his objection to send the RSK police from his region in Slun to Belgrade also to contribute to the security forces there during this time period. At page 23 of today's transcript, my learned friend, Mr. Jordash, referred to Bolshevich and Ricky going off of the radar. It's a reference, obviously, to two of the unit members in our submission. Because they deployed to Doughboy in crimes, far from being disbanded, they were there under the accused continuing authority. That's what we say. This is from Krsmanovic, utterly lacking in credibility. In case your honors have forgotten, this is the witness, Krsmanovic, who was presented with his own report, which was 2D-143, during the ICTY trial and said it didn't ring a bell. He didn't recognize it at all. He wasn't involved in any operative tasks, so that he wouldn't know anything about this. And when confronted with the unredacted version of this report, 2D-143, Krsmanovic changed his testimony into a version that served the interest of the accused, allegedly recalling being instructed by Stanišic personally to conduct an investigation to determine whether the Red Berets engaged in criminal activity in Elok were associated with the Serbian MUP. This is the evidence on the 24th of September, 2019, pages 8 and 9. Given the unique nature of the situation, conducting an investigation at the personal request of Stanišic, for whom he was testifying in the ICTY, Krsmanovic's feigned ignorance and loss of memory regarding his own report is not credible. The Chamber will also recall that Krsmanovic has a history of lying under oath and was convicted for perjury in the trial of fellow unit members for the assassination of Prime Minister Zoran Djindjic. And this is found in the 1st of October 2019 transcript on the 16th, 17th of 2019. Sorry, transcript pages 16 and 17 on the 1st of October 2019, and also 1D 405 at 7, pages 7 and 8. My next item is going to be this. Oh, apologies, I just forgot one. I overlooked one item here. If we could have a slide, please, very quickly. This is from P1168. It's a Captain Dragon Fund application of Dusko Bobic. What your honors will be seeing indicated in this document is that in his Captain Dragon Fund application, Dobic indicated that he joined on the 12th of April 1992 in MUP, Serbia, and listed Rajo Božović and Frankie as the commanders of the unit he joined in Ozren. Your Honors, the next item is a reference to Mr. Jordash's remarks today at transcript page 27. He mentioned that in 1992 and 1993, Red Berets were avoiding military action in favor of looting, and that this was not supporting the common criminal purpose. Your Honors, we would simply reply that when Crnogoratz's group arrived in Brčko, they joined in looting and killing Muslims, but remained untouched by the authorities. I think, Your Honor, to be extra cautious, we should actually redact my last remarks and go into private session, and I'll give fuller citations.
Private session.
Get back in open session, Your Honor.
Referring to the transcript today, Your Honors, at page 32, my learned friend, Mr. Stanisic's counsel, asserted, so Stanisic's role was not to prosecute the war. Then he continues, you might doubt his motives later on, but there's no doubt that from around September of 1991, he was trying to cajole Babic to sign the Vance plan. It's clear on the evidence. Counsel continues on the next page of today's transcript. The evidence is crystal clear on this point. From around August or autumn of 1991, Stanišic is largely engaged in trying to persuade RSK leaders to accept the Vance plan. Now, Your Honor, we addressed the Vance plan in some detail in our submissions on Monday, and we're not going to add to that now, except to point out what Stanišic was really doing during this period of time. If we could please have P1612. This is a slide. Your Honors will recall. It's public exhibit. It's an intercept. It's been referred to throughout the party's submissions, Your Honor, written submissions. The intercept on the 22nd of January, 1992. Conversation between Jovica Stanišic and Radovan Karadzic. So the very period in which Mr. Stanišic is said to be trying to persuade RSK leaders to accept the Vance plan. His role was not to prosecute the war. And we see on this slide, or not, that Jovica Stanišic says, no, we'll have to push them to Belgrade, you know. There's nothing else left for us to do. Karadzic says yes, yes. This is where Stanišic says, or we'll exterminate them completely. So let's see where we'll end up. Karadzic, yes. Stanišic continues. No, if they want it, they'll have it. Then they'll have an all-out war. Yes, yes. Stanišic says, better do it like decent people. So this is quite a different picture, Your Honor, than the Jovica Stanišic that was painted for you earlier this morning. The last item, and then we will conclude, Mr. President, is Exhibit 1D36. We have a slide for this. Your Honors, it is the Mladic notebook entry from the 13th of December, 1993. Now, this is after the Bosnian Serbs have rejected the Vance-Owen plan, much to the alleged chagrin and anger of Slobodan Milosevic. This is a meeting in Belgrade attended by Milosevic, Sokolovic, Stanišic, Baja Tabavčević, Stanisic's deputy, and General Mrksic. From the RS, there is Karadzic, Karajičnik, Mladic, Micho Stanišic. And we see here that Jovica Stanišic opens the meeting remarking that it is because of your initiative that we are meeting in order to improve your operational and tactical position and see about help from Serbia. Karadzic begins making remarks. And then we move down, he remarks, unification with Serbia is smiling upon us. And then, Your Honors, he recites for everyone present the strategic goals. So there's no break or abandonment by these JCE members, and certainly not Jovica Stanišic, of the goal that we've laid out clearly in our case from the very beginning, and it's the goal that remained the same throughout, and that is the forced violent removal of non-Serbs as expressed in the 6 strategic goals that Karadzic is reciting for this assembled group in 13 December 1993, long after the Bosnian Serbs rejected the Vance-Owen plan, long after Milosevic and Stanišic allegedly broke with them. Those are our submissions, Mr. President. Thank you.
I see Mr. Backrash on his feet.
Da, časni sude.
Yes, Your Honor, I believe it's the right moment for me just to say that the Simatovic defense will generously gift the 2 minutes to the Stanišic defense.
I'm grateful. So right to the end, same approach. We talk about procurement. We talk about linkage. We talk about common criminal purpose. And what do we have? Well, number one, my friend just talked about the, number one, we talk about the man who left the nascent unit because it wasn't in line with the common criminal purpose. What did the prosecution do? Point to the fact that it might have been used for anti-terrorist operations in Serbia, or as the prosecution imply, improper use in Serbia in terms of the protest. What has that got to do with the common criminal purpose? Our point is that there's evidence that the nascent unit was not being trained for the common criminal purpose in Croatia or Bosnia. What did the prosecution do? Ignore it. Second, Krsmanovic's report, 2D143. We say, what did the prosecution say about the fact that Kersmanovic reported in his report that the nascent unit had collapsed effectively. Men had abandoned it. It was disbanded completely after the corridor operations. What do they say? Nothing. They say, well, you can't trust Kersmanovic's evidence. But what about the report? Right to the end of the case, we raise an issue which is relevant to the common criminal purpose, to procurement, and what do the prosecution do? Step aside from it. And instead, what do we have? We say Cernograt's group in Brčko engaged in looting, didn't support the military operations. How did the prosecution reconcile that with Stanisic's grand plan that he was cooperating with the VRS to send in Crnograk to assist the military operations, to achieve ethnic cleansing? What did the prosecution say? Well, the crimes were untouched by the authorities. What about the grand plan? Why don't we address it? Why don't the prosecution explain and answer our questions? Why do they circumvent our questions every single time? And instead, what we're left with is the ending of their rebuttal. They pull out the single comment in this case where Stanišic makes a comment about exterminating, let's see where we are. I would urge Your Honours to search the trial record. In 5 years, it's the only comment you will find. And if you put it in its proper context, that is, in the context of Stanisic's attempts to get the Croatia and the RSK cajoled into the Vance plan, then you'll see it's an unfortunate comment, it's a bad-tempered comment, but if you spent months trying to cajole the Czechniks and the incompetent jerks from RSK into the Vance plan and Croatia, you might be frustrated and say, let's see if we can get them to Belgrade, otherwise there'll be an all-out war. And the prosecution, what do they do with that? Not put it into context. Oh no, let's just pull it out. Because that's their tactic, not to address the law, but to achieve prejudice. Same with the last 1D36, the Mladic diary. Everything's taken out of context. 13th of December 1993, after the Vance-Owen plan has been rejected by the Bosnian Serbs, if you follow the evidence, if you look at the frustration of the Fry as they try to cajole the Bosnian Serbs into signing the Vance-Owen plan, and what happens? They turn up to assist the Bosnian Serbs, because of course they have to a certain degree. No one would deny, would they, that that the Fry should have helped the Bosnian Serbs with humanitarian aid. No one would deny that. But if they didn't supply them with something and they collapsed, no amount of humanitarian aid was going to help them from this vicious ethnic conflict. So supplying military arms, supplying humanitarian aids was a necessary part of the Fry's support for the Bosnian Serbs. Or else what should they have done? Just watch them get butchered? No. What is most telling, and what my learned friend won't tell you, is that when Karadzic sums up the strategic goals, nobody from the Fry ever agrees with the strategic goals. You will not find a single reference in any of the voluminous records, thousands of pages, where Stanišic, Milosevic, or any of them say, we agree with your strategic goals. Let's remove the Drina as a border. Let's create your corridor in the north because we want territorial unification. And the best the prosecution can do is keep cherry-picking and taking things out of context. That's not discharging your burden of proof. That's trying to prejudice the accused to achieve a miscarriage of justice. Thank you, Your Honours.
Thank you. This brings today's hearing to an end. I thank counsel for their comprehensive and articulate oral arguments. I also thank counsel for the professionalism and collegiality that they have demonstrated throughout these proceedings. I wish to express again the Chamber's gratitude to our court support staff, including our court officer, Mr. Ram Doraiswamy, for his invaluable assistance throughout this trial, the interpreters, the court reporter, the security staff, the usher, and all other essential staff behind the scenes. Without the commitment and unwavering professionalism demonstrated by the staff of the Mechanism Registry, we would not have been able to complete the court hearings in this case at a time when the global COVID-19 pandemic is deeply affecting everyone's life. Now, pursuant to Rule 104, I hereby declare the hearing closed. The Chamber will deliberate in private and will issue a scheduling order for the pronouncement of the judgment in due course.
All rise. We will away.